All right, so this video is how Mourinho won everything with no money. This is by Daily Dose of Football. I hope we enjoy it. Here we go.
It's been 18 years since a club outside the top 5 leagues has won the Champions League. Ever since then, football has been so monopolized that every year, only like 4 teams actually stand a chance. Even when Porto won it in 2004, the stars had to align in every possible way in order to make the miracle happen. Just picture this: after an historic 5 league titles in a row, in 2002 Porto were about to miss out on the title for the 3rd consecutive time, which, in a club that obviously demanded success, meant chaos. The average attendance went down to 10,000 and the coach was sacked, but instead of going all out for some big name coach, Porto signed the guy who had been coaching União de Leiria.
Pause here. My FIFA career mode player just got transferred to Porto. Or loaned out to Porto, so got a little bit of a understanding of this club.
When it comes to the Portuguese league, clubs don't get much smaller than that, so why him? Well, that guy was José Mourinho, and to anyone who had met him, even back then, it was no ordinary man. His life had been a roller coaster ever since he was a kid, but his focus was always on one thing: football. His dad was a football manager and ex-player, and when José was 9 on Christmas Day, he was sacked. It ruined the holidays and it changed José. From there on out, he would help his dad any way he could. By the time he was 12, he was the one...
So if I remember correctly, when I was learning about Mourinho, I was informed that he was never a player. He just grew up around football and became... an exceptional tactical manager.
Preparing his dad's scouting reports. Still, don't believe the myth that Mourinho never played football. For 2 years he played at Belenenses and Rio Ave while his father was manager, once even scoring a hat-trick in the Portuguese Cup. It was only after all of that that they both decided Mourinho was better off on the sidelines, so he began studying sports science and later football methodologies, working as a PE teacher and attending any football courses he could. At 24, he played his last ever amateur football match, moved on to a youth coach position at Vitória de Setúbal, got promoted all the way onto second coach, and then his life changed forever. He was hired by Sporting CP to be Bobby Robson's translator. After only a couple of chats, Robson was mind-blown. He could see Mourinho was one of the brightest football minds he ever came across. Quickly, he moved him to second coach, and over the next 7 years, he was completely indispensable by Robson, who took him alongside him to Porto and Barcelona, then lending his services to Van Gaal as Robson moved to a sporting director position. All these years, Mourinho learned from them and waited for his chance to be in the spotlight. The storm was brewing. In 2000, he got to take over Benfica all by himself. It was a dream job, but it went massively wrong. By the time he joined, the market had closed, the club was in shambles, and before he even sat down on the bench in his first match, the team was already losing. After just 11 matches, elections had taken place and a new president chose to replace him with another manager, even though Mourinho had just beaten rival Sporting 3-0 in the Lisbon derby. Now feeling a bit lost, Mourinho waited for the start of the next season and took over at União de Leiria. Despite the downgrade, this decision set him up for success. Managing a team with virtually no budget, Mourinho became hyper-aware of all the hidden talents scattered along the league's smallest teams, and midway through the season he had dragged Leiria all the way to 4th place in the league, 1 point above FC Porto, which brings us back to the start of the video. Once in Porto, Mourinho did not hold back. With his iconic stoic stance, he told everyone they had their worst team in over 2 generations, but made sure to calm things down, telling the fans, "I am sure next year we'll be champions."
Wow.
From there on out, Mourinho began reforming the club. Even though his tactics weren't the most innovative, his impact was astonishing anywhere else. Training was immediately changed, now implementing a more scientific approach, every drill designed till the very last detail. The team's morale skyrocketed. It seemed he was capable of motivating them beyond what anyone else could imagine. And on the pitch...
That's... sorry, I was thinking about this. That is an unbelievably helpful thing that a manager could do for players. I remember I played for 2 different coaches who had different philosophies in American football, and both of them were successful, but player morale player morale was lost when a coach was just overbearing, and the coach just wanted to run you into the ground and make you experience suffering physically, and that basically the players don't understand why we're just being conditioned so heavily, and we're doing drills that don't seem to translate to actual on the field kind of performance. And so what ends up happening is you have a team who's very athletic, very conditioned, very fit, and very, we had an intense mindset, but our training lacked. So our fundamentals weren't as strong. We came in with passion and intensity, but a lot of times we were running really hard with no real direction. And then we had a coach come in who started designing drills that we could tangibly see that drill in the game. And when the game came along, we're like, oh, we drilled this in practice. We know what to do here. And player morale around practice was so much better. So I can see here that, changing the training process to dial in the drills that the players are drilling. I can see that being extremely motivating for players specifically, and that's really cool.
You could see it. The team was an orchestra who never missed a note. Despite their grace on the pitch, every player had a bit of something else. In Portugal, we call it raça, that grit, that willingness to die for a tackle, to collapse on the pitch from exhaustion. If that means getting in one last counter-attack, they would do it all for Mourinho. He was more than a coach, he was their prophet. But above all, what truly cemented all of this was his approach to the transfer market. Mourinho kept only a few of the team's players that he deemed to have some potential: Costinha, Bahia, Deco, and Ricardo Carvalho, and began a revolution, offloading the rest, and instead of signing the best, most expensive players he could, taking the knowledge he had acquired at Leiria about the league's hidden talents and signing those forgotten players we knew were underrated and desperate to pay Mourinho back for the chance they had been given. He said it himself when asked about Derlei specifically: "I promised him at Leiria, wherever I go, he'll come along." He gave it all for himself, the fans, his family, but above all, he gave it all for me. With Porto struggling to find the cash they needed, Mourinho opted to sell defensive powerhouse Jorge Andrade to Deportivo for 13 million euros, as well as Carlos Paredes, a former wonder kid who was the youngest captain in the history of Olympia, for 4.8 million, and finally loaning Hugo Ibarra back to Boca for 400k. Then, with this money, Mourinho brought Nuno Espírito Santo from Deportivo de La Coruña for 3 million euros, stole Jankauskas, who have been in great form during his loan at Benfica, paying Real Sociedad 2.4 million for him, and then raided all Portuguese small teams, taking Marco Ferreira.
You guys let me know, is it normal for a manager to actually, and this, I guess, is something I'll learn when I start playing Football Manager, which is going to happen, by the way. Channel members know a lot about that. Is it normal for a manager to be this active in signing players and selling players and managing this side of the game? When I come from it with American football and our professional sports, coaches don't have any. Well, some might, but not normally do the coaches have control over selling players and trading players. For the most part, at least from what I understand, a lot of times owners will trade players regardless of the coach's wishes, and then the coach has to work with whatever team the owner has assembled. So I don't know. He's talking a lot about how Mourinho is involved in actually the financial aspect of the transfer market and this stuff. So maybe a manager is just more involved than just coaching. But y'all let me know.
In Paulo Ferreira from Setúbal, 3.1 million, César Peixoto from Belenenses, 1 million, as well as Derlei, Tiago and Nuno Valente from Leiria, 1.2 million. Alongside all of this, Mourinho also pulled off some savvy free transfers, getting Maniche from Benfica as he had been ostracized by the club and forced to train by himself after refusing to sign with agent José Veiga, getting ex-Porto captain Jorge Costa back from Charlton after he had also been pushed out of the club by the previous manager, and getting Boa Vista captain Pedro Emanuel on a free, despite the fact he had just recently taken them to a mind-blowing league title. All in all, Porto came out of this with 6.8 million in profits and a team that at the time seemed like a bunch of nobodies and has-beens with no experience or chemistry. However, with Mourinho shielding them from criticism and leading them on with his undefeated charisma, ambition and confidence, they went on not only to win the league title like he had promised, but they did it while massacring the opposition, obtaining the highest points tally in history and surprising everyone by taking home the UEFA Cup, humiliating millionaire Lazio and Larsen's Celtic on the way. The standout players that year were maybe $500,000 signing Derlei, who scored an astonishing 12 goals in the UEFA Cup, being its top scorer, and Deco was the top assist provider in that same competition, despite having played in the Portuguese second tier just a few years before. However, every player in that team had a purpose, even those in the bench. It seemed almost like a perfect utopia, and it would only get better. In his second full season at the club, Mourinho went a step beyond all that he had done so far. With everyone convinced they had already outdone all that was even deemed as possible, Mourinho was convinced they could go even further. So with all the players looking to take advantage of the team's momentum and move to a bigger club, Mourinho sat them all down and asked them to believe in him and say that they could win the Champions League. And so they complied, as Mourinho would be quoted saying, "Sometimes the best investment is to keep your own players." Regardless, in order to make some money, Mourinho allowed Postiga to leave to Tottenham for 9 million euros and Capuscio to Rangers for 1. However, he still maintained his approach and brought Maciel from Leiria for 1.5 million, Pedro Mendes for an undetermined amount, and Bozingo from Boa Vista for only 1 million, while taking on a gamble on Carlos Alberto, signing what looked like the next Ronaldinho for 2.5 million. But above all, he signed Benny McCarthy back from Celta de Vigo, despite his refusal to stay at Porto 2 years earlier at the end of his loan. With the squad now fully assembled, Mourinho had now completed what to this day he refers to as his masterpiece. From the first 11 he fielded on his debut at Porto, only Bahia was left. In front of him, Jorge Costa and Ricardo Carvalho were solid as a rock, tremendous at ball recovery and capable of providing support in transition. Alongside them, Nuno Valente and Paulo Ferreira were the prototypes of the modern fullback, providing the width demanded by his diamond formation and covering the entirety of the flank. Costinha in the middle, an anchor, a titan, a squid with 8 arms and 8 legs, with many names. At nearly 30 years of age, he had reached the peak of his game. In front of him, Pedro Mendes connected him to the two creative geniuses that were Deco and Maniche, who then supplied Derlei, who quite simply was 10 years ahead of his time, and Benny McCarthy, the perfect poacher. While at any moment the likes of Carlos Alberto and always injured Alenichev could come in at any time and disrupt the match. Overall, they were incredibly utilitarian, ruthless in transition, incredibly composed, and capable of converting any sort of scenario into a goal. They were Mourinho's Real Madrid 10 years earlier. Getting to play and win that UEFA Cup was the perfect opportunity. If 1 year before the players had no experience, they were now as confident as Mourinho, and so they just carried on like nothing had changed. Sure, they knew they weren't the best team in the tournament anymore, but as Mourinho said, talent is not the only way to win matches. The journey started with a draw against a Partizan squad trained by Lothar Matthaus and a 3-1 defeat to Los Galácticos. Porto were tied for last place in the group after just 2 matches, yet they didn't seem bothered. Once again, Mourinho's unshakable persona seemed to keep the team together, and with that motivation by their side, following that defeat to Real, they went 34 matches without a defeat in all competitions. The following game came against Drogba's Marseille, and despite the big man's early goal, Maniche and Derlei combined for another 2 before Alenichev made it 3 and closed out the match. Then, in the second game versus Marseille, it would also be Alenichev who would score the result with a single goal, before McCarthy pulled off a brace versus Partizan, allowing Porto to creep up to the second place in the table, before facing Real once more, the real and final test. Against all expectations, following that 3-1 home defeat, Porto arrived at Santiago Bernabeu brimming with confidence, and even despite conceding just 8 minutes into the match, Derlei ended up getting the draw. However, it was right then and there that Porto faced their biggest upset of the season. Derlei had ruptured his ACL. The team's doctors couldn't even be sure that he would be back before the end of the season. This made Mourinho sound the red alert and led him to anticipate Carlos Alberto's arrival half a year. He knew it would be tough to get him ready for Europe that fast, but in his own words, it was completely shameless, and the magic that came with that could help the team. With the group stage over, Porto progressed in second place, 3 points below Real, which meant they were bound to face tougher opposition in the knockouts, and so it was. Manchester United would be their first adversaries. In one of the first ever matches played in the brand new Estádio do Dragão, everyone expected Sir Alex to teach Mourinho a thing or two, but even though Porto did go down early, McCarthy pulled off a brace with 2 incredibly relentless strikes and gave them the win against all odds. Still, Mourinho knew he hadn't won yet, and just as he had predicted in the press conference, at Old Trafford, Porto once again went behind early, meaning if the game was to end like that, they would be out on away goals. On the 75th minute, holding on to whatever hope there was left, Mourinho subbed in Ricardo Fernandes, a free-kick specialist. And I kid you not, on the 90th minute, Porto gets the perfect free kick. Ricardo prepares to take it, and Benny McCarthy nudges him to the side and insists he should take it himself. Mourinho goes crazy on the sideline, and then bam, it goes over the wall, Tim Howard gets a hand on it, and Costinha smacks it in on the rebound. Porto were through to the quarters. Mourinho had taken down Sir Alex in Fergie time. With the underdogs all going in full force, Porto then met Lyon, and don't for a second think that was weak opposition. They had Juninho, Edmilson, Malouda, Essia, Elber, Diarra. I mean, they had won the league in 7 consecutive seasons and had humiliated Bayern Munich in the group stage. Regardless, Porto were in total control the whole time, winning the first leg 2-0 and drawing the second at 2 goals each, with Maniche being the hero. It was in the semi-finals against Deportivo that things got serious again. They were super Depor. They were no less than Real and Barcelona. In fact, they had been battling with both of them for the top of Spanish football, and just 4 years earlier, they had been Spanish champions. Even the great AC Milan fell 4-0 before them just weeks before the match. And it was right here that Mourinho finally seemed a bit more tense. The first match dragged all the way down to a 0-0 final result. Jorge Andrade had been sent off for Depor, but regardless, Porto now had to beat them in the away game. It looked like serious trouble, but then a light shined down at Mourinho. After 4 months, Derlei had fully recovered from his injury and would be back for the away leg. And alongside this, Mourinho noticed something interesting. Depor were known for being very physical, however they had 7 players who were 1 yellow away from not playing in the final. So, the mind game started. Throughout the whole match, the Porto players told them that 1 bad foul and they would never get to play a Champions League final. Deportivo were on their tippy toes, afraid to make a single wrong move. This anxiety got to them, and after 150 minutes of football, Mourinho could feel them breaking, and out of nowhere, they did. Penalty for Porto, and it couldn't get more poetic. Derlei was the one to score it. Mourinho subbed him off, and all of the Porto fans gave him a standing ovation. He looked up and was completely reduced to tears. He had taken them to the final once again. With all the other competitions wrapped up, the squad got on the plane and flew to Gelsenkirchen. There, Monaco awaited them once again. Don't let the team's current state fool you. They had Deschamps as coach, Evra, Morientes, Julie, Cissé, and Dado Peugeot. They had beaten Depor 8-3 in the group stage and had already taken down Real and Chelsea on their way to the final. Still, that day it was obvious Porto had something they didn't have. All night long, Porto gave them hope only to demolish them in each counter-attack. First, 19-year-old Carlos Alberto made history, opening the score sheet and becoming the youngest ever Champions League final goal scorer. And half an hour later, Deco and Alanichek both scored to settle the result down at an impressive 3-0. As Mourinho held the trophy, his demeanor seemed relaxed even. Finally, he was allowed to switch off his ever-confident persona and enjoy his success. When asked about it, he said, "I don't like to call this my masterpiece. It was our masterpiece." And in fact, by the time the tournament was over, besides Deco sharing his spot as the tournament's top assist provider, no other Porto player was topping any charts. Their top scorer was Benny McCarthy, and 18 players had scored more than him. It had more than obviously all been a result of a collective effort, but that collective had been designed and handcrafted by Mourinho himself. Out of the players he had picked for that squad over the years, only a few failed to achieve success. I guess this is that part of the movie where they tell you how every character's life turned out. So, Nuno Espírito Santo became a Porto legend and a high-profile manager. Paulo Ferreira, Ricardo Carvalho and Bozingua all moved to Chelsea for 20, 30 and 21 million respectively, and all of them went on to win the Champions League again. Carvalho was the third most expensive defender of all time and went on to become arguably the greatest Portuguese centre-back of all time. Deco went on to place second in the Ballon d'Or and was sold to Barcelona for 21 million plus Quaresma. Despite being 30 years old, Nuno Valente still got his dream move to the Premier League. Bahia retired at Porto. He is also considered by many the greatest Portuguese goalkeeper of all time. He is now en route to become the next Porto president. Pedro Manuel took over as captain once Bahia left and also retired at Porto. Speaking of captains, Jorge Costa retired 2 years later in Belgium, and despite forfeiting his armband to Bahia in order to avoid conflict after his return, he is widely considered the greatest captain in the history of the club. Maniche completely turned his career around, moved to Moscow for 16 million euros and went on to play for Chelsea, Atletico and Inter. Costinha also experienced a revival despite being 30 and joined Maniche at Dinamo and Atletico. On the other hand, both Derlei, Alanishev and Benny McCarthy struggled massively with injuries and saw their careers stall after the tournament. Carlos Alberto moved back to Brazil for 10 million euros and never fulfilled his potential. He regrets having left the club. In total, Porto made 130 million with the sales of these players. No team in Europe made more money over those years. They did it without ever spending more than 10 million euros in a single transfer market. It was the last fairy tale in the history of football so far.
All right, wow. So, what Mourinho was able to achieve by handcrafting his roster, by using the transfer market wisely, he was able to build the perfect team. You know, he has identified the few players that he thinks are the real special pieces that kind of make a team stand out. You know, what we would call a franchise player in American sports. He found the pieces, the foundational pieces that he wanted to build around, and he built around them by choosing players who were quality but were maybe a little underrated and they had something to prove. Players who would leap at the chance of getting the opportunity to prove their worth, and so in some sense Mourinho is responsible for them actually changing their life with garnering the contracts that they would later get. And so they can look back at Mourinho in that early time there. So I think that's really brilliant to choose players that you know are going to have something to prove, who are quality and can actually play within the philosophy that you want to play with, the tactics that you want to put in place, and to build that team around it. That's really really exciting. I have a great deal of respect for Jose Mourinho, and you know, as I've been digging into tactics, been digging into the different managers, I have found that I really do appreciate his contribution to the game. Even if I have kind of a little different philosophy, I like a little more offensive-minded philosophy in football. But it's easy to see that he's a legendary manager. Just put it that way. That's where I'll end this video. If you guys enjoyed this reaction, go ahead and smash the like button for me. That really does help me out. We're almost to 16,000 subscribers, and I know that a handful of you out there are watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. So if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button, that'd help me out a lot. It won't cost you anything. You don't have to join channel memberships or subscriptions or anything like that. If you'd like to join channel memberships or Patreon, you can join those as well. I do have a members only Discord where we chat about different things, transfer market. We talk about rumors in football. We talk about matches that are currently ongoing, tactical stuff. We just kind of got a nice community in there. So Patreon channel members, there is a members only Discord. I do some other kinds of content. I've watched some episodes of Ted Lasso, which are available for those members. and we're going to be doing some Football Manager content, me and Corey, and so that'll be going up for the channel members, and some of that going up here for free on YouTube. All of that being said, I really appreciate your support, and thank you for watching this video, for liking, for commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one.